Hey folks, I hope everyone had a fantastic week, and we've got a few exciting developments to share. In our latest Visual Disruptors podcast, FX Guide's co founder Mike Seymour speaks to Stiller Studios CEO Patrick Forsberg. As one of the most technically advanced VFX studios in the world, they offer clients advanced motion control and motion capture equipment housed within a huge pre lit green screen space, all tied together with a live real time preview on set, courtesy of Unreal Engine. Forsberg describes how they help old school directors work in a new school environment, giving them the ability to see their live action footage perfectly in sync with their CG imagery. Visit our blog to listen to the full podcast. The next evolution of the Unreal Engine Learning Portal is almost here, and you can preview the new experience now. Try out over 35 courses and take advantage of updates such as improved search, progress tracking, quizzes, and badges. Your feedback is critical to the success of this new platform, so please feel free to submit your feedback in the Learning Portal or visit our forum thread to join the conversation. If you haven't heard, Epic Games and Twinmotion have joined forces. Twinmotion, a high-quality, easy-to-use real-time visualization solution, enables you to assign PBR materials, set up lighting, and even choose the season and the weather with just a few clicks. And the best news, our new version of Twinmotion is absolutely free to download and use for all customers until November 2019. Find full details and answers to questions you may have in our FAQ. Storm in a Teacup hopes to turn heads with its ambitious fourth title, Close to the Sun, a horror adventure loosely centered on the works of Nikola Tesla. The Unreal Dev Grant recipient, sporting a brooding steampunk aesthetic, follows Rose, who must rely on her wits and puzzle-solving skills if she wants to survive a creepy voyage on the fictional floating ship. Learn from founder Carlo Ivo Alimo Bianchi, who has worked at Ubisoft, Crytek, and Square Enix, in this interview. He shares his reasons for venturing out as an indie developer, the benefits of developing with Unreal, and what the Unreal Dev Grant meant to him and his team. Now onto our top weekly Karma earners. Many thanks to Everynone, iCov, Stwyford, Shadow River, Nebula Games Inc., Indie Game Cove, Buriadol, Norland, and Christoph Morva. They've jumped in on Answer Hub to help their fellow devs. If you answer questions there, you too could see your name up here. Our first incredible spotlight of the week is Coral, a love letter to the ocean. Dive into the beautiful underwater world as a sea current and solve puzzles to bring coral reefs back to life and spread the beauty of the oceans and the different sea ecosystems. The Dev Grant recipient has also created an incredible making-of video of his team's adventure at sea. And this is all out now. Now to take a look at Jump, a solo student-animated short film in both 2D and 3D. The 3D elements were created in Unreal with the 2D overlaid on top. Jump has a great, unique feel, and I hope we can see even more blended projects like this in the future. And our final spotlight this week is a project from Embark Studios. They've created a short blog series on how they've leveraged photogrammetry with remarkable results, as shown in this beautiful desert biome. Learn about their process in their series linked below. And thanks for joining us for our news and community spotlight.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Unreal Engine livestream. I'm your host Victor Broden, and all the way from Seattle we have North American evangelist Christian Allen. Thanks for coming on the show, Christian.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Good, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, before we get started, I would like to let everyone know that we will be handing out Steam keys to Coral, which if you paid attention to our spotlight that we were wearing earlier, it was the first spotlight of the day. So keep an eye out in chat and make sure to grab them. And as always, we will be pasting images, so you actually have to type them in manually. Doesn't matter what fancy bots you got going there to snag some keys. You have to do it the old-fashioned way. All right, so what are we going to be talking about today, Christian?
Today we're going to be going over a demo project that I built called Parachess. It's created all in blueprints, mainly using the Paragon assets that are free on the Unreal Marketplace.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we were chatting a little bit earlier about rapid prototyping using marketplace assets, and that has been a big part of this project for you, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I when I started the project, it really was I wanted to have a platform for experimenting with different things in Blueprints to present different concepts in Unreal as new features and stuff come online. And I wanted a test bed of a single game instead of having a bunch of different little showcases that I would do and kind of throw away and start over again. I wanted something that I would kind of build on. And even just getting started with that, I very rapidly or very quickly learned some of the benefits of using production ready assets, doing rapid prototyping. You learn a lot of gameplay elements, performance wins. There's just a huge host of things that you get from using high quality assets in your prototyping that you don't get out of gray boxing.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about the fact that you can actually use assets that are the poly count that you'd like, the instruction cost for your materials and everything off the get-go. And so even though you're in the prototyping phase or you're building out the core framework of your game, you are still sort of in the realm of the cost of all of your assets and mechanics in the game, and you can then find and fix performance issues, early on, instead of afterwards once the artists get on board or the designers, etc.
Yeah, I think that's something that people really overlook is that, the old school way of doing it is kind of you gray box everything, you get your prototype up and running, you do playtest after playtest after playtest, over months and months, however long it takes. And then once you're kind of satisfied with that, the art team comes in and starts arting things up. And that's generally when you start running into performance issues and optimization issues. And so by starting with production level assets, the example that I use is that if you're making a third-person shooter, you could sit down with your art team very early on, your art and your technical team, and agree that so one of, like, for example, the Paragon characters, if you chose like Shinbi, that could be the model for the quality level that you're going to hit as far as poly count and amount of materials and memory cost and all those things. And you can kind of sit down and go, okay, well, we're going to be in that range, that's where we're going to be at, maybe we're going to be a little higher, but you can do your testing with those things actually loaded, and then you're doing your play testing and all those kinds of things. And then I'm getting a visitor, I'm on live stream. Should have put a sign up. Sorry about that. So as the art assets come online from your team that are unique to your game, you can swap those out without having those kind of performance hitches. And you also might run into issues that you might not have foreseen. One of the things that I ran into when as new Paragon characters were coming online, as we released them on the marketplace, I was of course really excited to bring those into Parachess, and decided that the way I was going to do that was to have different chess sets that you could choose from. Well, there's a lot of Paragon characters, especially when you take into account the different skeletal mesh skin variations for the different characters. And I very quickly realized that, especially as I'm working to bring this prototype to consoles and things like that, that it wasn't going to be feasible to have all those characters loaded into memory at any one time. So I went back and did some research on soft object loading, how to handle that in Blueprints, went ahead and built a system to handle that. And again, that's something that those kinds of things, again, in the kind of older way of thinking about things, that might be not something that you consider. You might think, well, I'm going to have X number of characters, and I'll build, all my standards to that. And then all of a sudden, you want to do DLC, or you want to add more characters or have expansions. And then all of a sudden, you're running out of memory. So again, that's a great example of something that you can get in early on, and get an idea of what your budgets for your levels and your characters and your animations and all these various different things are going to be, and then just swap out those live assets as they come online.
Great. Do you want to jump into the project?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. I'll have to look over to my screen over here so I'm not ignoring you.
It's the classical streamer point of view, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. So this is Parachess at its base level. Essentially, not to give it away too much, but it is chess. So I didn't make up a new game here. Actually, normally when I present this, I have this whole pitch about how I came up with this great new idea for a turn-based strategy game. But you folks are probably a little more familiar with it. You kind of gave it away that it's a chess-based game, and I actually I chose that for a specific reason. When I started doing prototypes for presentations, I'm a game designer by trade. I've been working in AAA and indie game development for years and years and years. And like most game designers, it's hard for me to present gameplay to folks when I know that it's not 100%. So I'd find myself when I'd sit down to start doing demonstrations, and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to work on a space flying game, with randomized planets, and then all of a sudden I'd go down a random a rabbit hole of implementing a randomized planet system, and then I'd want to get the effects on the ship just perfect to relate to different things, and so I just naturally start to feature creep. And so when I decided to put this together, with the it was timed right along the lines of when we were releasing the Paragon assets. I said, well, why don't I pick an existing game and just build to that standard? And the great thing about that is, one, it keeps you from getting rabbit holed because you have a existing rule set that you need to implement. So you can just work to that standard, much like a much more standard production environment where you might be working off a design plan or a production plan, implementing a set of features. It helps you learn prioritization, what's more important for both demonstration and core gameplay. But the other thing that it does is, people understand the core game concept. So I don't have to explain what the game is. I can just demonstrate how the assets work and how the blueprints work. So that turned out like a really, really smart idea. And it exposes you to a lot of different things that you might not, again, get into until later. You start implementing UI, you start implementing different environments and getting concepts for that going relatively early on that you might put off until later. Especially if you think, as many game developers do, you think, well, I have a plan for that. It's going to work out just fine, once I implement this new environment or this new feature set. But you often run into to issues as you do those. So the earlier that you can do them, the better.
All right. So what do we got here?
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and just play the actual game. So put it up to a resolution so that you can see it. So this is Parachess, and as you may expect, it is chess. So I've got a suite of characters, and you saw I could choose out of three sets, and I'm continually adding more sets to choose from. And we've got the different characters represented: pawns, kings, queens, bishops, that sort of thing. And each of them is represented by a different Paragon character. And then we've kind of got themed color-based sets ideally with profiles that match the different character types. They all have their own animation sets. All of these, every asset that visually you see in this first level is available for free on the marketplace to Unreal users. So this is all Paragon characters along with the Monolith and Agora Paragon map set, which comes with some free kite demos. And then just recently, when we released it for free on the marketplace, I put in the Good Sky blueprint and use that for a customizable skybox. That's a really cool setup that you can get. So gameplay-wise, I'll go into gameplay mode, and we have all of the logic built in for the actual chess moves. So as I select the different characters, the game highlights what the legal moves are available for those characters. And right now this supports both mouse and controller input, although the input's a little bit different for the controller. I can get into that if we have time, but I can move characters around. And as you can see, we use kind of a teleportation presentation. The characters play an animation, we play an effect, and then when the characters actually get into combat, you'll see here I've highlighted a character. We've got a capture move available, it highlights it in red, and if I actually capture the piece, then it plays a death effect and plays a little animation for the character coming in. Now, one of the things that I learned very quickly for what you just saw there was that the animation time for the emotes, which is what plays after a character captures another character, really do affect the gameplay experience in chess. Something like you just saw is incredibly fast. It can be really too fast for the opposing player to really comprehend what's going on if they're not paying attention. So I found out that that something like that was very short. And then we have much longer emotes available for some of the more fleshed out characters besides the creeps. And what I found out was, while those are really cool, especially the first time you watch them, some of them can get too long. So what I found was actually probably about 3.5 seconds is the ideal time frame for a capture character. So again, lessons that I learned, using real assets. If I had been using, chess pieces and blocks and said, well, I'll put in, combat animations at some point in the future, then I wouldn't have learned that lesson. So we can move the characters around. There's Gadget again doing one of her movements. Each of the characters has a set of emotes based on the animations that come with the characters, and essentially it randomly chooses between the different sets. So here again, we have one of the longer animations, and while they look very nice, they can be a little bit long. So that's the basic core of the gameplay. So we've got all of the rules set up for chess. Well, I'm still working on all of the rules for chess. So we've got all the logic for the appropriate moves for the characters. That's all handled in the board blueprint. This is essentially built out of 2 blueprints with a couple supporting blueprints. The board has the logic for actually constructing the board, and all of the move logic for the different characters. I've built in the capture logic or threat logic for the king, because of course you have to be able to track when kings are under check. The next set of logic that I need to build in that hasn't been built yet is the logic for when a king is trying to move into a tile that is under threat. So one lesson I actually kind of learned, and I've said this quite a few times when presenting this, is in hindsight, if I would have done this again, I probably would have done pair of checkers, because chess is a little bit more complicated as far as the rule set, and it's taken me longer to build the actual logic for chess moves and different things like that than it has a lot of the other basic systems to actually get the moves and things like that. So I've got that to build in, and then I have some special moves like doing a rook, those kinds of things. But essentially all of the logic is in as far as highlighting the available pieces. I definitely wanted to, because this is game design, I wanted to have a good user experience so that I can play this with my kids, and as I'm playing the game. It's almost kind of a learning experience where I can, I'll run a little sheet, move some characters around here. We can click on the various different characters and see what their move availables are. So the knights, have their appropriate jump moves, and kings and queens and things like that. So this is something for demonstration purposes, I probably could have skipped over. But again, it was a really good logic exercise. A good optimization exercise as far as how many computations I'm doing at any one point, seeing how things like that affect frame rate and things like that. And then in the actual tile blueprint, that's where the magic happens. So one of the things about Parachess is, I design it to be as efficient as possible. And I want to do as few computations as possible and have it as flexible and as expandable as possible. So eventually, I have grand ideas of trying out things like 3D chess and stuff like that. So I want to build the systems to be as development friendly as possible. So the actual logic for quote unquote moving the pieces, which is actually an interesting little bit sleight of hand, is that if we look at the main board blueprint here, you'll see that the board is constructed of the tiles. So the tiles is each one of these units represented by this square. And if I go over to the tile and go to the viewport and zoom in, these are the fundamental pieces that construct the tile blueprint. So we've got the base cube with the material setting on it, which is the actual tile itself. We've got a skeletal mesh that's representative of the character. We've got the 2 cameras attached to it that's used for the camera swapping for the capture effects. And then we've got a couple effects that move and death effect are actually attached to the actual blueprint itself. And so within the board, even though to the player, we're moving characters around when we actually play chess, in actuality, nothing actually ever moves in Parachess. All we're doing is we're using the game logic in the board, which is presented similar to a game mode in like a classic first-person shooter, to tell the tiles the set of logic that they need to know. So when a player activates a move on a board, we tell the last tile, i.e. the tile that the character is moving from, what it needs to do, which is pretty much the same every time. We just tell it that it's essentially moving away. And then based on the piece that it's moving to, because in this case, chess rules are relatively simple because you're not allowed to move into a friendly space. You can only move into either an empty space or an enemy space. If you move into an empty space, essentially we just play the move effect and then go on, because there's no point in playing cool animations every single move. That would get really repetitious really fast. But if it detects that there's an enemy in the space, that's when we actually do the sequence where we do the camera switch. We play an effect while we're playing that explosion death effect. Again, that's out of the Paragon assets that I've just done some scaling on. We play a death animation, then we destroy the existing skeletal mesh, bring in the new skeletal mesh for the new character, play the move-in effect, and then start playing the emote animation. And then as soon as that emote animation is completed, that's what actually triggers the camera to return, the boards to swap, everybody to return to their idle state. And essentially everybody resets once that's done. So if any highlighting or anything is still active, all that gets cleared up. And all of that is covered up by those camera swaps, so the player doesn't see anything. Now, one of the things that I did learn pretty early on was that, doing these cool camera effects when we capture the characters, I pressed the wrong button, wrong cheat code. Well, there you just saw one. You saw a little death animation. Do a little bit bigger one here. One of the things I run into, like with this pawn right here, we see the queen come in and they play a cool animation, and that's all neat. But if we let the board come out here and we see where the queen is placed right here, right adjacent to that is another character. So that character right here, depending on its size, if it had been this big bulky rook over here, there's a good chance that character would have gotten in the way of that animation. So I found that out pretty quickly. Having a character play a cool emote animation is not all that exciting when all you can see is the back of another character's head. So what I do is I detect whether there's a piece in the adjacent tile. And if there is, essentially while the animation is playing, so I check the piece and then set the timing of this to the other character's animation time frame. I just hide that skeletal mesh, that adjacent skeletal mesh. When I first did it, I initially hid the entire tile, and that worked great at 1920 by 1080 resolution. But then when you blew it up to 4K, because you had a wider field of view, you could actually see the missing tile drop out of the world while I was doing that. So I changed it over just to hide the skeletal mesh. And again, because all that happens during those camera transitions, unless I explain it to someone that's happening, your brain just doesn't register that the other character, technically should be in the way. So again, those are the kinds of things that you're going to run into using real assets to prototype that you wouldn't necessarily run into if you're just prototyping with blocks to get your core gameplay in. And again, by having things like not just on performance and optimization, but on things like scale of characters, like, choosing your largest character, your smallest character, or, if you're just going to have one size human character, just picking what size that is. Having those things locked in ahead of time just can save you a lot of trouble and challenges down the road. You can imagine in a first-person shooter, you're got your environment team making levels and building doors and all that fun stuff. And then all of a sudden here comes the character team, and they've got one character that's half a meter taller than all the rest. And now they don't fit through doors. So now you have to go in and like, well, do we adjust all the doors in the world? Do we, adjust the character's animation so they squat down? Do we have to come up with some kind of special movement capability for them to move through these tighter spaces? But again, by having those things up front, hopefully you can avoid a lot of those things that you have to go back and fix in development.
Yeah, especially if you would have had little cubes there, then the camera problem would never have been the case. Exactly.
And you don't think about a lot of the things that you run into when you get real characters in a game or real assets in a game. You might not consider parallax. Again, if I come from a shooter background, so I use shooters as examples a lot. If you put in a third-person character of a certain size and scope with a very particular arm placement for the weapons, and you adjust your parallax for the player aiming capability, that takes a lot of tweaking and finessing. And if you haven't standardized the exact height of the characters, the exact height of the character's shoulders, the arms, and then how that looks and feels in relation to your third-person camera and cover, if you're using a cover system, how all that plays out. If you're just using a default, mannequin, which can be great to prototype with and to test with, but if you're just using that and your character team isn't on board with those specifications matching up, you're going to have to go back and retweak all that. You're going to have to repolish all that, things like parallax and things like that, camera placement, cover systems, all that kind of stuff. So the earlier that you can have finalized standards for your assets in development, the better. So I mentioned before that we having the different character sets. And if I come over here to the tile, and let's see, back in here to my set piece mesh. This is the logic. And I need to clean up this blueprint a little bit. This is the logic for actually swapping out the meshes when we do the different moves. And originally I was just doing set mesh. So I was actually just setting the different skeletal meshes. But I ran into an issue where certain material values on skeletal meshes would be inherited. So if there was specific material settings on skeletal meshes and you started swapping them between other skeletal meshes that had other custom material settings, you'd sometimes run into errors where skeletal meshes would inherit material settings from previous skeletal meshes. So I found it just wasn't a good way to just be constantly swapping these meshes over and over and over again. So what I actually do is actually destroy the skeletal mesh component and use that transform, spawn in a new skeletal mesh component, and then set it to the new one. Now, because all the characters are preloaded, again, a benefit of chess. One of the nice things about chess from a performance planning perspective is that you start with the maximum amount of characters on screen that you can possibly have. So that's going to be kind of your worst case scenario. And then as you play the game, you get less and less characters on screen. So your performance just kind of goes up rather than down, as opposed to like a real-time strategy game where you start with less characters and continue to add. What was I saying? Oh, about the character loading. So I needed to have those characters in memory. And of course, hopefully users know that when blueprints do a hard object reference, when the blueprint's loaded, it loads all of the related assets to that object reference. So in order to have all of the different meshes available, I decided to come up with, where is my, sorry, my little streaming button is in front of some of my blueprint icons here. I decided to come up with another blueprint that actually loads the appropriate character assets using soft add object variables. What I did is, this is actually a separate blueprint, and I'm actually probably going to go back and revamp this and move the logic back into the tile blueprint itself. And that way, each one of these can just be a blueprint interface with just the variables in them. I went ahead when I first set this up and put the logic here into the blueprint, so it needs to be a full blueprint, but I think it would be a little more efficient to have the blueprint logic in the tile and just have it load the interfaces with just the variable information. So that's on my task list. But essentially what we have is we have the actual variables that are used in the tile. So we have the move animations, which are the animations that play before the character moves after they're selected. We have the emotes, which are those dances and things that you saw after they do a capture. Idols, and things like that. And then death animations, and then the actual meshes themselves. Now, in these blueprints, these references are actually empty. If you see over here on my default values, all of these references start empty, and that's on purpose because the references are hard object references. So by having them empty, they're not actually loading anything. And then what we do is we have a set of soft object references. Now, the way you can think the difference between a hard object reference and a soft object reference is a hard object reference is actually pointing to the actual quote unquote physical object and all of its related assets. So once that's pinged, it has to load into memory so the blueprint knows how it's functioned. A soft object reference is much more of like a web address to your hard drive. So it's just telling the engine where the asset is. Because it's a soft object reference and the object isn't loaded, if you need to interface with that once it's loaded, you need to cast to it. So what we essentially do is we go through, we have the soft object reference, we load the asset into memory, and then I cast to it and then set the actual variable to that reference once it's loaded.
Yeah, we actually we got that question last stream, and we went over it a little bit, but it would actually be great to see exactly how we're using it because we didn't have time for that last week. So this is a real use case, right, where we need a lot of skeletal meshes and we don't want to have them loaded into memory at all time, right?
Exactly. A lot of skeletal meshes and a lot of animations because while I'm not using the complete animation for the blueprints for each character, we've got, 5 animations loaded for each character. Each of those animations is specific to the character. We've got each of the skeletal meshes for the character, and then each of the skin variations. Like if I go in and I'll load a different set here. If you'll notice that the bishops and bishops, rooks, and knights are skin variations. There are variations offered with the Paragon set. So the same character profiles, same base characters, but they're actually separate skeletal meshes with a separate set of materials loaded. So I actually keep those separated out as well. And so the way I have it set up, and again, by moving this logic into the base blueprint, I can set this up as blueprint interfaces. But basically I have a master here. So this is where everything's set up. And it's, I don't actually use this. This is just a master that everything's set up in. And then in my, oops, maybe I shouldn't minimize the entire engine. Bring that back up again. In my content browser, I have children set up. So the children is where I do the variation. And these can just be data-only blueprints that have the actual soft object references in them. So by doing that, the nice thing about that is, you're very specifically controlling what's being loaded into memory. And it takes a little bit more setup, but you're actively loading into memory. Once they're not used, either you can specifically unload them, or generally when a garbage collection happens, they'll be unloaded automatically if they're not referenced anymore, I believe. Double check on that. So if you're going to have it's something commonly that I see where if you're going to have a large variable set of different variations that you want to reference, but not necessarily loaded at any one time, this is a way to do that. You'll commonly see people set up a blueprint with, say, a weapon selection screen where people, or a weapon selection opportunity where you go over a weapon and it detects what kind of weapon it is and then assigns that to the player. And a lot of times in those kinds of blueprints, you'll see a ton of variable references to all the different weapons, and then it'll just choose the one and assign it. But what a lot of people don't know is by having all those hard object references in that blueprint, as soon as that blueprint is loaded, every single one of those is loaded into memory. Whether it's a direct variable or whether it's cast to, it's going to be loaded into memory. So the way to control that is through soft object referencing. And when you set that up, it's relatively straightforward, although it's not well broadcast, is when you create the variable, essentially over here on variable type, I'll expand that a little bit out. Over here on variable type, you've got what type of variable it is. So you standard, you go in, you choose the type that you want to have, but you get this drop over menu to your right. So you've got your object reference, your class reference, soft object reference, and soft class reference. And that's pretty straightforward. The object reference is going to load that specific object. The class reference is going to load that specific class and be able to reference an entire class of objects. The soft versions of those are, again, that concept of a web address on your hard drive. It's not loaded until you specifically need it loaded. Now, you need to keep that in mind because you might get used to, one of the things that people tend to forget with this as well is once the object is loaded into your editor, when you're in editor, play in editor mode, like here, you'll notice when I start playing and I decide to load the character set, it's instantly happening. So that's because once the object is loaded into memory in the editor is going to keep it loaded into memory. It just assumes that you need that loaded into memory because you're going to be using it. So that load time in actual play, if I start up a new session and hit play, for this PC, it's a few seconds it loads it in. But for lower end machines, it's going to be a longer load time to load that stuff into memory. So I need to take that into account. How do I want to handle that load? Do I want to do that? Cover that up with UMG widget? Do I want to have some other kind of player interaction while I'm doing that? Do I want to use the cinematic, fly-in or something like that to cover up that load? So those are going to be other things that I play with as we go forward. So again, by prototyping with high resolution assets, and again, I could have gotten here, if I'd started out with this project and I had one character that my art team had built, and I said, okay, cool, duplicate that a million times. But then, expand out and start using other characters, then I start running into those kinds of issues that I need to deal with. I start running into real world issues like, oh, this loads really fast on my super duper fast, awesome laptop that I have. But if I try to put it on a console or put it on a lower end PC or mobile, that's where I got to start worrying about load times. So I need to start thinking about solutions for that.
Could you explain the difference between the soft object reference and the soft class reference, and possibly when you would use one or the other?
Yeah, so the soft object reference, the object is a specific U object. So a very specific blueprint generally, or a very specific asset like a skeletal mesh. The class is referencing just the higher level class. So if you have a class of multiple different types or a class of blueprints, like a character class, and then you have multiple objects based off of that class. Sometimes you want to reference just all, like every class in the level versus a very specific one. So that's when you would use that. I haven't worked too much with referencing classes over specific U objects, just because I haven't run into it as much here. But if you wanted to have, say, multiple, you have a base class, and then you have extension of that class with multiple different specific objects, and you want to reference every object in that class, you can create a class reference. Yeah, that's when you'd use that.
Cool. Where are you expecting to take this project? What's next for you, and sort of is there an ultimate goal that you at some time will hit, or are you going to keep iterating, sort of to learn and to be able to demonstrate and?
Yeah, so for me right now, the one of the goals that I'm working on is porting it to console. So I'm working on both Switch and Xbox versions, and part of that is just to go through the process for myself, because it's been a while since I worked on console. And I haven't directly worked on Switch, but I'm also using that, in my role as an evangelist. My focus really is on independent game developers. So I spend a lot of time with developers, especially EULA developers who are getting close to ship, and dealing with certification and things like that. So I'm going through the same process that any indie developer would go through, as far as getting approval on the console, having that approval sent over from the platform holder to Unreal to have it affect my Unreal account and access the console development ability and things like that. So that's helpful for me to just go through those processes. I try to approach everything as if I'm a consumer. So hence I generally try to work with only work with release versions of the engine, unless I'm doing some very specific demo. Try to access the assets to the marketplace and things like that, and that way I'm always as a game designer does, always trying to experience things as the end user, the consumer, in this case developers, are experiencing. So that's part of the reason for me to bring it onto console, is just so I can have that hands-on experience. And again, having these different things. For example, when I first implemented Parachess, I had this the great thing about it is that I actually, if I go back, let's see if I can remember where it actually is. All of the move actions that you see in the game are all based off this one tiny little block, event on tile click. So this is in the tile blueprint. So all the tiles are sitting there waiting for a click interaction. When they get a mouse click interaction, they check to see if the game is actually going, and then they call out to the board and start that entire process of running all the game logic and highlighting all the tiles. That right here is where it all kicks off. Now that worked great on PC. That works awesome on PC. You just click on the items. You saw how easy that was for me. It works perfectly. But of course on console, that's not going to work as easily. And, again, this is, kind of looking forward, prototyping systems. As soon as I sat down and said, okay, well, I'm going to, put it for console, I got my handy gamepad and hooked it up and started playing it. And of course, that whole on click thing isn't going to work. Now I could have tried out, doing a virtual mouse click, a virtual mouse cursor. And, obviously on touch screens like iOS and things like that might still work. Although I'm suspect as far as, screen space and things like that. So what I did is I went into the player controller and just came up with a set of logic. This took me about one evening in a hotel room somewhere as I was traveling around the country, and did this is basically a stick input for doing the character selection. So essentially, I detect which player is in control of the board. That drives some of the directional motion. Because I use north, south, east, west for my direction logic. When I first set everything up, I labeled everything up, down, left, right, and then I very quickly ran into the problem where when you're switching sides on the board, the whole inverting up, down, left, right just kind of fried my mind every time I tried to wrap my head around it. So I changed over to that north, south, east, west. But essentially, what it does is it just has a logic system for detecting what tiles are on your team and how to move through them. And so when I actually play the game, you'll notice that one of the things that it does is it always highlights the king first. So whenever it's your turn, the first piece that's going to be highlighted is the king. Now that doesn't really matter on mouse because I'm immediately just clicking to the thing that I want, and most mouse and keyboard players don't even notice that the king is the one that's initially highlighted. One of the reasons for that is when right when it starts off your turn, that's when it runs the check to see if your king is under threat. So it checks any possible move spaces to your king. But what I have is, you can't see it, but I'm trying to loudly click left and right
Yeah,
onto my
we can hear
keyboard.
it.
Yeah, so that's me clicking left and right, simulating my controller. But you can see it just scrolls through the characters. If I continue to go to the right, it gets to the lower left, and then it cycles back around. And that was easy enough to do, just using the tile counts. But the other thing I noticed is when you're clicking again, so if I click on a character and it highlights, and then I click again, that again, it's very intuitive. It's just anybody who's a mouse is very used to that. But with a keyboard, you don't necessarily get that amount of feedback of what is highlighted. So I actually put in used again one of the effect from one of the Paragon. Actually, I don't think this is from Paragon. I think this might be one of the free effects packs that we released recently. But I just play an effect on the character, and again, that's attached to the tile. And now when I move left or right or up or down, now it's cycling through the available move positions. So I've got kind of a two-step process. So now we've got the position highlighted in green that I want to move to. I press the select key again, and the character actually moves. And then the next thing I ran into with that is, again, left and right works great, but what do I do when I have characters that are all spread out across the board? So if I play my little cheat, which will swap teams, now I've got characters all over the place, and some in the front and some in the back. So what I decided was that a set of logic is essentially left will continue to move upwards, left and right across the board. So if I basically just continue to click left on my stick or on my keyboard, it'll just cycle that way all the way across the board. And up and right just mirrors though. And if I go down to the right, then it'll just start back up at the top. And again, that seems like little things, but UX and player interface is a huge, a huge part of the game.
Yeah,
and so, yeah, exactly. And the next step for this is to actually get this in players' hands, because what you want to do with something like this is be able to hand someone, ideally in this case, someone that understands what chess is, hand them a controller and say, okay, choose a piece. And they're going to hopefully use the system that I think they're going to use and just kind of click through and go, oh, okay, I pretty much instantly understand this. I click through here. Once I get to the character I want, I hit A. Once I hit A, now I cycle through the actual available move pieces, which for a queen is quite extensive, but I get it onto the place that I want and hit enter. Now, there may be other things that I learn once I start handing this people. Maybe the first thing, maybe it should cycle through the characters that are available to capture first and then cycle through all the empty pieces. I don't know. I'm not going to know that until I actually put it in the hands of players. I can have an idea of what I think players are going to do and what I think players are going to want to do, but you never really know that until you have that in and functioning. And so again, one of the best things that I heard in a talk at one of the Unreal Dev Days was one of the engineers, and he was talking about optimizing performance. And he said one lesson that people continually don't seem to learn is that you really should be testing your game on your target hardware. And to me, that sounded like, yes, you should definitely do that. But this is an example of something like, I can add controller input at any point that I want, but there's, I think, going to be a lot of tweaking on this controller input that I'm going to need to do once I get it in players' hands and have them interface with it that I wouldn't necessarily do on a mouse. Because I haven't done, turn-based interactions like this on a controller, my intuitive gut on how it should work may be right and it may be wrong. But by building it, modularly in blueprints, all of the logic is all built in and labeled so that I can go through. And actually, it's all done with math variables on how it moves through based on what your tile is and what the numbers are to the next tile over. I'll be able to adjust that. The other thing, because I am doing quite a few actions every time you cycle through those, when you change the different selections, I'm doing material swaps on the highlighted piece, the highlighted tiles, doing material swaps back from the other highlighted tiles, doing lots of various different things. I try to build efficiency into the system right off the bat. So for example, with this, once you start up your turn, it goes through, and when it's doing that king check, that king threat check that it does at the very beginning, it also builds an array of all your available pieces, so that when you're doing that cycling through that left and right, it's only running the check on the tiles that you already occupy. So that automatically, for one, skips over tiles that you can't select. So that solves that problem right off the bat. So players aren't, moving the selection to an empty spot and sitting there hitting A, which they will do. So it solves that problem right off the bat, and it also makes sure that it's only running the functions on the various tiles that it needs to run. So again, thinking about optimization and performance as early as possible.
Is this in 422?
This is 422, correct?
Okay.
Yes.
So,
which I honestly haven't gotten enough time to play with since it came out. I chose to upgrade to 422 at the same time I got a brand new system, so I had to get everything moved over to the new system, and just got everything running up in 422.
Was it relatively seamless for the project?
Yes. Yeah. The only thing I ran into on 422, once I got all the made sure all the marketplace assets were up to date, and that's one of the reasons whenever I give talks on marketplace assets, I definitely recommend keeping your assets organized so you can quickly see the folder structure and everything. But I think the only 421 to 422 is one of the most seamless transitions that I've had. I don't think anything's deprecated. I think the only thing I'm getting is I'm getting some errors related to lighting, that I've got some RGB values that are deprecated, that are no longer needed, that I just need to go through and clean up in some of the environments. But other than that, everything was super smooth. And even though I did have the extra steps of having a new PC, so I actually not only upgraded engines, I had to have everything checked into Perforce, do a brand new install, recompile all my shaders, and run everything like that. So.
And that's good to do. I tend to make sure before I do a significant commit that I try it on another PC that I have, which is I'm sort of simulating if someone else who I was collaborating with would be pulling my files down, and make sure it happens. I also try to package on another computer that is not the one that I've been working on, just to make sure that it, at least it's a double check, right? You at least have another computer that it's working on. And I also say that's one of the things that I decided when I was working on a large project. I stayed on binary because I knew that I wouldn't have the time or even the knowledge to fix anything serious if something got deprecated in C++ that I had customized myself. And that's one of the benefits of doing it all in blueprints, is that you essentially leave some of the tough engineering to all of the engineers here at Epic, right?
Yes.
Each version goes through a very rigorous QA process to make sure that when you upgrade your project, and if it's built entirely in blueprints, it's relatively seamless. Obviously, some things are deprecated, but we try to always put a little note there and make sure that it's visible.
No, I definitely I recommend especially indie developers and folks starting out. I recommend staying in blueprints as much as possible. Generally my process when a new version of the engine comes out is, I'll get the new version of the engine, get everything installed, and quickly, to your point of, testing it on other machines and, testing other downloads. That is an excellent thing to do, because even on this last install, I did a full check-in through Perforce, got my new laptop, did a full download, went through all that process. And it turns out that there was one file it was actually in the Howitzer character pack. It was a material object. Didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't get properly added to Perforce. But I never saw that because I hadn't downloaded it
one
onto
machine.
another PC. So I had it locally, and it just wasn't, it for whatever reason didn't get marked for add, and it just wasn't added. And of course, my luck being the case, I went on a business trip the next day, grabbed my new laptop, went on a business trip, and went to install everything, and I start getting errors popping up about missing material, missing texture reference, and I'm having to do the research, like what, and of course I'm doing it at the same time as an install of a new engine. So I'm assuming maybe there's something deprecated, maybe there's something that hasn't been updated in the assets. And finally, using the output log, I looked at the errors, tracked it down, and went, oh, that's because this file doesn't exist on this instance of the game. And I go back and I look in Perforce, and it just wasn't properly added to Perforce. So I pulled a fresh copy of the marketplace content down, re-added it to the project, updated it in Perforce, rechecked that on my other PC, and did a fresh get, and then it was all good to go. But yeah, testing it on multiple PCs, to make sure that you haven't, accidentally locally duplicated some file or locally created some files and not had it checked in, or, things like that. It can be really important, and cooking it out and trying it on different PCs, those kinds of steps. As often as that you can do them, can save problems down the line. And those are little things, with a project like this, it seems like a relatively simple project. But we've got, I don't know, 70,000 files, I think, in the depot for this project. So, just doing a straight 70,000 file get onto a new laptop over a Wi-Fi in a hotel room is generally not the best place that you want to be testing out and making sure that you have everything checked in correctly.
Definitely a real world example, though.
Yeah. Yes. So, and I think I forgot the other part of your question. I got into testing other stuff.
I'm not sure. I was ready to ask you the next question.
Okay.
They were curious.
As far as errors on 422, like this is basically the examples that I've got is just some vertex error, painting errors that needed the levels basically just to be resaved in 422, and then it solved the issues. And I think the other couple errors were just basically some extra lighting data that isn't needed anymore. So super smooth. I love. And then when you do run into issues with deprecated stuff in blueprints, that's where I was going, was essentially when I go into a new version of the engine, the first thing I really do is try to open all my assets. I just sit down, I start opening my core blueprints, opening everything up, seeing what the output log says, run the game. Obviously, you're going to need to, reset up your shader cache. So I actually have a special level that has all the characters in it, so that the editor loads up all the materials, into the shader cache. For me, what I did, because I have like all those characters, I just open up that one level. It's got all the characters, all the assets in it. It starts building a shader cache, and I just let the laptop do that overnight. And of course, you don't have to do that, but it saves you time in the future.
That's a pretty neat way of doing it. You can also actually store the shader cache and push that to Perforce as well, right? I know that's...
Maybe you can. I'll get into that.
I remember having that as a solution once when one of the members of my team, their computer, it took too long every time. Yeah. But they had a good internet connection, and so it was faster for them to actually pull the shader cache versus generating it themselves, which I'd say that's probably a very rare instance that's the case. But it is possible. Did you, so this is apparently a chess term, and I Googled it behind the curtains because I didn't know what it means, but did you develop en passant? En passant? Which is a chess term that I'm not really familiar with what it is, but I know it's a chess term.
I don't think I've implemented that.
Okay.
I know I need to get the rook move in, where if you haven't moved your king or your pawn, you can, or king or your rook, you can do the swap there. I do have like the logic in for like the pawns that can detect, adjust their movement based on whether there's a threat in there, but. En passant. Someone asked me about that at some point. En passant. Now I want to look it up.
Well, it's an old game and it's very popular, so.
An enemy pawn that could have captured it had. Oh, yeah, someone did ask me about that. Yeah, if you move you move past another pawn from your initial 2-pawn position, then the other pawn can catch it. That would actually, looking at it, I could probably implement that relatively easy in the pawn logic, because I do have the pawns set up into their own logic set. That's one thing that I did, is actually the way that the move logic was the most time consuming in chess for me. And part of the reason is funny, because I started out kind of doing the rook first, moving up and down, and then I went and started moving the rook east and west, and then I started figuring out the logic for diagonal piece movement, which got a little more complicated. But I actually thought the knight would be the most complicated, just because in my mind as a player, the knight is always the one that I think of as most complicated, because it doesn't move in straight lines. But the knight was actually the simplest. This is the knight here. And the knight essentially just has the 8 possible move locations based on its current location. It doesn't care who is in between it and its move piece, because it moves independently of any of that. So essentially, I just have to check those 8 slots, check 2 things basically, or well, 3 things. Is it on the board? Because the way I'm doing the logic with math, I want to not allow the pieces to move off the board. So I check to see if the tile is on the board. I check to see if the tile's empty, and I check empty or occupied or friendly, and then I check to see if it's a enemy slot. So all that logic is very much simplified compared to the queen, who actually runs through. The queen actually runs through all of these checks: the north-south check, the east-west check, the diagonal piece check, and then the pawn has the special checks built in to see if either it's moved yet, because that's the thing that it's different. If it hasn't moved, it has a different rule set than if it has moved. So, like I said, pair checkers would have been a lot less custom stuff. And then we get into the king logic, which is basically checking all the other pieces against the king, the same kind of thing. So
they were wondering if it might be better to divide all of your logic in the graph into individual events. And off the top of my head, I believe that each event that you actually add to your graph adds to the memory cost of loading the actual blueprint. And so using a ton of events just to sort of clean up your blueprint code will actually add to the memory cost of loading that actor.
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, if you're going to have a lot of events, i.e. a lot of event dispatchers, right? Because you're going to need event dispatchers for those custom events. At the beginning of play, you can see here where I've got my begin play, and essentially I'm assigning all the various different events. So I've got, a tile selected, some kind of test that I built, the camera switches, the king threat check, loading the characters. So essentially at the beginning of play of the level, I assign all those events. So each one of these event dispatchers, has its own costs, and each one of the associated events has its own cost. And so having a ton of events everywhere, I think one of the challenges that I commonly see, and me and you actually had this discussion at a meetup a while ago, is that there's a little bit of a breakdown between efficiency when it comes to the visual cleanliness of a blueprint versus the actual computational cost of a blueprint, right? So in this example here, I like to use this as an example. So this is the logic for the north-south piece check. So when I move a rook or a queen, this is the logic that checks the row or the column of pieces above that piece and the column of pieces below that pieces. So what it does is it comes in, and for the first sequence, it's going to set that to a positive, i.e. it's moving north on the compass. Could be up or down, depending on which side you're on. And sets that to positive. then it comes through, and 8 times it goes out and it checks. It says, is this a valid tile? If so, can I move there, essentially? And then if I can, great, do it again. Bump up another 8 spots, which is 1 column up. Run that check again, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it 8 times. Now, at any point that it hits a blocker in that check, it hits either a friendly or an enemy or the end of the board, it stops doing those checks. So it doesn't. It's rare that if you get a piece right in the middle of the board and have it completely empty both ways, it's going to run all of the checks, but it'll stop checking once it hits a collaboration. Now, then it comes down after that sequence. It comes down into this sequence, sets that check into a negative setting. So now it's running south on the board instead of positive. So it runs those 8 checks again. Now, when I originally set this up, this looked much more like these pawns, where the pawn has 3 different blocks. Right here, it's got a north check, a northwest check, and a northeast check. And so the queen would have had 8 of these blocks going north, and then 8 of these blocks going south, and they're all duplicated of each other. And I did that initially just so I could start working out the logic of, okay, I'm going to, do these checks. Okay, what happens when I run into a friendly? Okay, what happens when I run into the end of the board? What happens when I'm already on the edge of the board? Start running, implement it, start testing it, and I hadn't taken this into consideration, and I need to, add this logic, get it all sorted out, get it all cleaned up. And so I had these massive wall of script blocks on my screen. Now, obviously, from an organization standpoint, that's messy, and from a from a load time aspect of actually opening the blueprint in the editor, that takes time. However, from the once I took those amount of checks, so 2 times here, that's 2 times 8 on this sequence, and then so that's 16. Another 2 times 8 here, that's 32 checks, right? And then we're doing that 32 times here, 32 times here. So we've got exponential amount of checks. It's the same amount of computational checks, whether I'm running off a sequence that looks nice and clean, or I've just got the same block duplicated over and over and over again. Now, of course, once it's cleaned up like this, the nice thing is once I've got the logic all worked out and all the kind of bugs worked out, once I want to make fundamental changes, if I want to make fundamental changes to how I do it, I can just go in and modify the one block. But I find, having a messy script early on, i.e. lots of references and lots of lines, it can be tempting to want to clean that up and move things into functions or whatever. There's a time and place for that. Everything has its costs. A good example of, I'm going to open up. This is something that's a work in progress. This is a character selection blueprint. So this is a blueprint object that has a set of skeletal meshes attached to it, a little base, and some effects. And what this is this will be dropped in, and then as you choose the different character sets, it will show you. And I've just got the logic in that no matter where I place it, the skeletal meshes face the camera. So that way I don't have to, if I drop them into a different environment, I want to spread the characters out or whatever, move them around, that's all controlled through array variables. So I can go in and customize their different data sets that I have here for like the different meshes and stuff like that. But when I came up with the logic for building that transform, I actually built that into a function. So essentially, to do the transform adjust based on the camera location, essentially, I start with the original transform, the location essentially is what I'm getting. Get the camera location, get a look at, break the rotator, adjust the Z, add a 90-degree variation because I have a 90-degree adjustment on the camera just because that's how I set it up, make a new transform, and then do a return. And then so when I come back over to my actual event graph, all that it looks like, oh, it's in my construction script, sorry. When I come into my construction script, all I'm going to each one is just getting the mesh locations out of a transform, playing that function, and then setting the transform on the mesh. And so if I decide to use that that set of logic, because functions need to be math only logic, no temporal modifications, I could bring that in and use it in other places. So it's partially a function of quote unquote organizing your blueprints, and partly a function of making them more efficient. But those two things don't necessarily always mean the exact same thing. Just because you have a reference that's pulled a lot, like if I go into my tile blueprint here, these two integers, this team owner integer and this piece number integer, these are the integers that drive the logic for the actual tile to know what to do. So essentially, I know what my team already is as a tile, and this is telling of what the team owner of the new tile is, and what the piece number coming in. So these two integers are used in a ton of these calculations. Now, a cleaner way to set that up would be to set a variable right here. Just set that to a variable right off before I run the sequence, and then reference those variables. But because I'm still, continually adding things to this, I like to be able to just visually look up and across and see, okay, I'm directly referencing that integer. I know for a fact when I look at these green lines that variable being referenced is that integer. And yes, it's quote unquote messy. And yes, at some point I may come back in and actually replace it with a nice little variable reference. So they all have their own variable references. It's nice and clean. But what I can know is I can look across this and know that all of these variables are referencing those integers. I don't have a situation where I've accidentally gone in and maybe accidentally, dragged this variable over and dropped in a different integer variable in here. Because that's a possibility, right? You could accidentally do that or accidentally drop in the wrong one. I know specifically it's referenced off that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then code is for humans, right? We are the ones who need to read it and understand it so that we can tell the computer what to do. And so if you have a method that is easier for you to understand and sort of get a better glance at your project and sort of understand what's going on, that's all good. There are almost no wrongs. Just depends on sort of the scope of the project and how many people you're working with, right?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is essential is label your blueprints.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you are going to be the only person that ever works on this project, and you know exactly what you're doing, you know exactly the logic that you're implementing right now, and thus you don't need to label anything. In 6 months, when you come back and reopen this blueprint and need to change something or want to add something to it, you're then going to have to spend an hour sitting down there and figuring out your own logic because you didn't label anything. I'm definitely guilty of it. I try to label things. I try to keep things when I know ahead of time. You'll tend to see blocks like this that are very nicely organized and very nicely labeled. But it would be very easy for me to go in here and go, oh, well, I know that when I look on these references, these are all referencing meshes, right? And these are all referencing emotes. I mean, the variables are labeled, right? So I could just leave this off. It's not necessary. But when I pop in here and look at it, it saves time to be able to go, oh, okay, I've got a bug in my move animation variables. Okay, let's find the correct one. I'm going to go through here. It's all right here. It's all nice and labeled and clean and laid out. I tend, I was raised in the West, so I think left to right. Although I tend to go up and down, as you can see, within my blocks. But as I get into larger blueprints, I'll tend to kind of spread out from the middle. So I'll tend to have like my begin play kind of in the middle. And then branch off from there. So like here, I've got my movement logic and my king threat logic down here. This is off of begin play. This is the initial team selection, bringing up that widget and loading the actual characters. So that's right here in the middle. And then up here, this is the logic for actually swapping the turns. So just essentially changing the team turns, doing the camera swaps, assigning the king. And then over here, I've got a bunch of cheats that I colored red and said, do not ship. Please do not ship this. Color it red. That means red means it's eventually going to be deleted. That's the color coding I use, is that green is in ready state, gray is working. Blue and green are usually ready to go. Red's going to be deleted at some point. And then if something's like placeholder, special tests, I'll usually leave it to gray until I'm got it to a certain point, or sometimes I'll just make it a super crazy color like purple or something like that. But I just use colors like that help. And to me, it's about having things organized, not just to organize them, but 90% of the time you're going to have to come back and touch something in here at some point. And either yourself and it's going to be even worse if it's someone else trying to debug. Trying to debug someone else's script, whether it's in Blueprint or any language, is always a challenge. I think any scripter worth their salt has probably been there before, where someone got sick at the end of the project and you had to go in and fix a bug in their script, and if they haven't labeled things and haven't organized them, it's a real time sink. So I highly recommend right off the beginning, just start labeling things. You can always change them. Like this was one of the very first. This is the script. It's actually in the construction script. But again, organizing wise, I thought like, I'll start it and I'll put it into its own function because I'm going to have a bunch of stuff in the construction script. And this ended up being the only thing in the construction script. So don't really need that to be in its own function. But I set this up last July. No, this would have been like around GDC, I think, that I set this up. It was the very first thing I did. And I could have, I haven't really needed to touch it since. This is the logic that just lays out. It sets the size of the tiles to 300 by 300 units, lays them out in that 8 by 8 grid, and then notifies them of what tile place they are. And I might never come back to this ever, but if I didn't have any, labels on this and it just looked, that'll delete the entire block. But anyway, you can imagine if this was just a bunch of script, I wouldn't be able to decipher what this is. I'd have to sit down and actually go through and figure it out.
Would your logic and everything you set up allow the game to support like n times n amount of tiles?
Yes. Yeah, that's the idea. So I haven't moved those into their own variables. So I would have to go through and at some point what I want to do, I want to add spacing capability, i.e. shrinking and expanding the board. How I handle pieces on that is still up for thought, but also multiple levels of boards. Mm-hmm. Star Trek 3D chess. So that's why I use pretty much integers for everything. And then probably in hindsight, now that I'm talking to you about it, if I had set those into a base variable that I could then change on the fly. But so I need to go back in and set I just use basically the way the math sets up, because the boards spawn, I think left or right. Basically, to go right and left, you go +1 or -1, and to go up and down, you go +8 or -8, because it's an 8 by 8 board. So I would just need to change those into variables for like a 10 by 10 board or a 12 by 12 board, something like that. Change those into variables, and then you'd be able to go in and actually set those options. So yeah, but that's the idea, is to build these kinds of things to be really expandable. Like even if we go back into that that character selection actor, if I go into the viewport, I mean, it's pretty simple, right? Like most people's inclination for something like this of, this is going to be a level that you open at the beginning of the game. So it'll be some kind of environment. It'll open it up and these character sets will be sitting here and you'll be like, I want character set 1. I want character set 2. And actually, if I open up the demo, got a demo space for that. Open level. Let's test showcase. Let's not save anything because I have no idea what I've been doing. So in this space, I've got that blueprint. You can see it in this blueprint. This is just a duplicate of my my default level. Again, I set the good sky on noon, but just drop that blueprint in, and the functionality is that essentially I just, am cycling through the character sets. So I can be like, oh yeah, that's the character set I want. This team A on the left, team B on the right. I've only worked on this for about half an hour, so it's not fully fleshed out, but I've got the basic functionality in of, hey, there's characters, they're set up, they're moving around. Now, you could see the initial way that a lot of people would do this is they would make a duplicate of this level, right? They would place these skeletal meshes into that level, and then they would open up the level blueprint and start, doing the logic based off of that. But I always try to build things systemically. I don't know if in the future that if I want to actually use, an actual level, I might want to have this floating in space. Might want to add this as part of some other UI blueprint, loaded in and have it displayed in front of, widgets or something like that. I might want to do different things with it. So what I do is in the logic of the actor itself, like I said, I got that construction script. That's just basically setting up the look of the characters. But even doing that, when I go back and I have those characters placed, having the characters look at the camera is relatively easy to do. If I set the camera in the level and tweak all of the Z-axis of each of the characters, I could set them all perfectly up to look at the characters or look at the camera, and it would look awesome. Until 6 months down the road, I go, you know what? I need the camera to be way closer than that because I want to have a better view. Or maybe I decide, oh, you know what? I need to dynamically move this camera based on the resolution. And now all of a sudden I move the camera closer to get a better view, but the characters on the edge are looking off into nothing. So I just build the construction script to handle that and build it systemically. So everything's handled through these arrays in the build, in the event graph to actually do all that adjustment. So yeah, those are the kinds of options that you can build in.
That's great. Are you planning on sharing the project at some point?
Yes, I am. Amanda hit me on the last interview we got about that. I've gotten quite a few questions about that. So I've got some cleanup to do. I want to move some things around, like I mentioned, moving some of those blueprints, transferring those into interfaces, moving the objects in there. I am looking at moving some of that board logic into the game mode. Again, in preparation for the ability to have different game modes in chess. By having that logic live in the game mode, then I can have children game mode or different game modes and be able to swap those out. In the beginning, it seemed logical to have all that in the one blueprint, but I think having it in a game mode fits better within the Unreal system. So once those things are kind of done, and I just do my initial tests on console, just have a build on that, then I do plan to put it up for people to be able to download and rip it apart and start messing with it.
Are you planning on writing AI for the enemy so you can play against the computer as well?
That's on my list, and the way that the way that it's set up, because characters don't move and because everything is based off of those two integers, actually building a quote unquote AI system would be relatively simplistic. I think the way that I would approach it is that I would have to go get someone's cool rules for chess of what the best moves are, or what some of the moves are. And essentially I would just do a survey of the board each move and say, okay, the opponent's, the AI opponent's set looks like this. My set looks like this. So I'm going to choose one of these random moves and then do a reset from that. And then just continually just have this database, which would probably just be a set of an array of variables that the AI would check. Whether that's the best use of my time, maybe I might just do a framework of that system of, what the actual logic would be and not do a fully fleshed out, multiple choice AI, maybe just have a single run through or a single set of things that then other people could be able to plug in, that kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of experts in the world that have come up with awesome chess logic stuff. Me me trying to roll my own isn't ever going to compare with what they've done. So it's going to be more about pulling that information in.
But it would be in
How to make
Blueprints.
it accessible. It would be in Blueprints, yeah.
Yeah.
So like I said, I think actually building the framework and the logic behind it, for me, I think is relatively straightforward. So it wouldn't be a lot to add to the project, probably a couple days of work. It's just the actual, like all those combinations, getting all that data entered would take time.
What was your process or workflow to put the Paragon characters together? For example, fixing cloth, hair physics, etc.
I honestly haven't really had any issues with that. Basically, let me open up that other level again. Essentially, I just dropped them in as is. And when there are a couple little things to clean up. The couple issues that I did find in the assets that were actually bugs. For example, Howitzer in the first iterations on this particular skin didn't contain all the material assets for the rabbit, so he was green. There's a few materials that weren't correctly hooked up, especially in the variable different skins. I actually found those, notified the marketplace team, and they actually got that cleaned up on the marketplace side. So aside from some very minor issues, like I think the cloth physics on her sword, on Countess's sword, aren't active, but we've got hair going on Countess. Seraph over here has some awesome cloth physics. All these cloth physics are actually responding to a wind actor that's placed in the space. So if I open it up, I can bring up this wind directional source here. That's just an actor that you drop into the level, and that's affecting all of the trees and such too. So you can when it's actually playing. It's because this isn't when it's actually playing. You can see the trees move and stuff like that. So I essentially created the project, added the assets to the project through the Epic Games launcher, and then just went in and started setting up references to them. Now, one of the things I have done again, and I think this is a really good idea for all. I recommend doing this whether it's Unreal Marketplace content or other licensed content that you may get, or even outsourced content. I keep it all separated, so you can see on my on the left here on my layout, I've got my chess content, which is essentially all the content that I've created for this project. So I've got some custom animations that I've modified, my blueprints. I've got some environment assets that I've just run some basic things on, the FX that I've edited a little bit. But everything else I keep in the default install directory. So that way, if there's any update, if Good Sky updates their blueprint, which they just recently did, I think for 4.2.2, updated their blueprints to be compatible with the new engine. I can just go and re-add that to the project. It's going to default it to the same directory. Perforce can tell what's changed, and then I can only check in what's changed, and we're good to go. I don't recommend taking those kinds of assets and ripping the folders apart and spreading them out all over your project. If you do want to put them into your project, you can use instances to reference back to the parents and put instances in other places in your project. But that way, your source content is another way of having source control, since it is external to yourself and to your project.
Just to loop back, because we got a follow-up question about using events instead. I'd like to the best information you can find on events, functions, macros, different types of ways to communicate with your blueprints will be to watch Zach Parrish's tutorial that he did on blueprint communication.
Yes.
I will go ahead and paste that into chat. Thought I had it copied. Right, taking questions. I'll go ahead and paste that into chat. Check that out. I've watched it several times. It's the main. I mentioned it on the stream previously. It's a.
I need to watch it again.
Yeah, and it's all still relevant. Nothing has changed there. Nothing has changed there. So you can just go ahead and watch that, and you should get a good overview on how all of that works. They were wondering if
getting a handle object communication is super valuable, and getting your brain wrapped around how to have different blueprints talk to each other is super important. And once it kind of clicks in and you really kind of understand it, that expands out to widgets and how widgets communicate with blueprints and how controllers and pawns communicate with each other, and starting to get a handle on all that stuff is super valuable. So that's a great resource to check
And I would
out.
especially say if you're ever planning on making your game multiplayer, which you should be thinking of from the start, you need to know how these things work. When you're not doing multiplayer, you can do it in a lot of ways, and it will all work on the one instance on your machine. But when you're trying to do it in multiplayer, you're gonna have to know when you need to use which kind of communication, and how that how the instances of your actors on different clients and the server communicate with each other. And so knowing that and using that as part of your design when you're working even on a single player project will set you up to be able to faster get the results you want if you're developing a multiplayer game.
Yeah, and even in single player games, think about efficiency and think about your target platforms. It especially when you're starting, if you think, oh, this is just only going to be a single player game, it's not going to matter. So it's fine if I'm getting all actors of class every frame, to check this one actor. Whereas you could get exactly the same thing at the beginning of the level of get all actors of class and add those actors to an array and never get all actors of class ever again and just reference that array for the rest of the level. There's a lot of optimization like that that you need to think about in blueprint communication and think about how you're calling stuff. I hope Zach touches on event tick in there and why you should never use it as a designer. At least that's my opinion. But always think about efficiency and performance. And again, both the target platform that you think you're going to be on and where you could possibly be going. That's one of the biggest things with indie developers is that you have the flexibility and the independence and the mobility to be able to change to market conditions. So hey, a new lower end mobile device takes off and is super popular, and Unreal Engine supports it. But if your game is hugely inefficient because you've only tested it on your massive water-cooled PC, and you don't have any efficiency built in, it doesn't matter whether you're single player or multiplayer, you're going to run into huge performance issues as soon as you try to bring it onto that lower end hardware. So building in, performance and optimization ahead of time, even if you don't think it's really super necessary right now, there's no harm in doing it, and you're going to learn a lot of stuff while you do that as well.
Did you consider using Blackboard and behavior trees for the basically the logic of the chess pieces?
It was a possibility. I worked with behavior trees quite a bit in my last Unreal game that I worked on before I joined Epic. It's not really needed for the logic of the moves because the way that Parachess set up is not. It's intentionally all glass and smoke and mirrors, right? It's intentionally not moving characters. Like one of the reasons I don't move characters, like of course, the biggest thing that everybody says when they see this game is like, oh, it's like battle chess. And they're like, well, can the characters fight? I'm like, well, they could. And, I can still get the characters. Actually, it's on my list too, is to have, when one character captures, they'll beam in, you'll have two characters in each corner. They'll both play a little fight animation and then one will win. And that's on my list. And that'd be relatively easy to build within the existing system. Now, having an AI pathfind, through the other AI, or have them play a walk animation, and then in the old battle chess system, one character would just slide out of the other character's way while one character went up, and those kinds of things. That wasn't really a high priority. It didn't bring a lot to the game. It's not revolutionizing chess. Teleporting characters, quote unquote, teleporting characters around is just as useful. So, and the way I would approach, again, because I'm building to this rule set, and it's not about necessarily, trying to build the smartest, next thing in chess enemy AI, because I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to be able to compete with anybody in that realm. It's more about creating a functional. Yeah, it's not the goal. So just by having a system that, so that, in chess, it's always a set number of variables. every single thing is always a set number of variables. And that's one of the nice things about chess. There is no time that AI has to react where at the beginning of the turn, the queen's in one place, and at the end of the turn, the queen's in another place, like a shooter AI might have to do. And that's where AI blueprints and things like that come into AI reacting on the fly of like, hey, I'm doing this, and now the situation's changed, so I'm going to switch over to this other behavior in my behavior tree because now the inputs are different. In chess, the inputs can't change until I start getting crazy later.
That's great. I think we're actually a little bit over time here, and we've definitely gone through quite a bit of questions. Yes, we are. It's
I could go for another hour talking about
I know you can, and that's so great. For everyone, Christian very frequently visits meetups here in the US, so if you have the chance to attend one where he'll be, where do you usually advertise which meetups you'll be at? Is that Twitter?
Usually Twitter's the best place. I try to get stuff out ahead of time onto the launcher. Amanda's super helpful with that, but sometimes the dates don't come in, get locked down. A lot of times the meetups especially are getting locked down, a week or two in advance, and then there's not enough prep time to get stuff up onto the launcher. So if you follow me on Twitter, at Cerealin, it's in the tweet that you guys put out.
Right down.
Yeah. I usually share, usually what happens with meetups is I'll have a show or a conference in a specific region. Like a few weeks ago, I went to the Vector conference at Eastern Kentucky University. And since while I was going there, I reached out to Amanda. She touched base with the meetup leads, ended up in Indianapolis and West Virginia. They had meetup openings around that time frame. So then once the conference got locked down, then I had a couple weeks to lock down with them. Then they locked down their venue, and I think a week and a half, and then I was able to share it out as soon as they had it locked down. So it's a real collaborative effort with the meetup groups because they are community driven. I try to be as flexible as I can to help support them. And so sometimes that means things come down a little tight to the wire, but definitely Twitter, LinkedIn. You can also, if you don't do, the more casual social media, LinkedIn is another great place where I try to share all of the various different meetups and opportunities like that.
Yeah, and that leads me not putting my hands in Christian. I'm so sorry. No hands in Christian. It's a little. I can't really. It's kind of blocked there. I just shared a link to our user group page where you can actually find where all of our user groups are around the world. And if you feel inclined to host one, there's none in your area, and you think there's a local effort to go to them and share what you're working on, feel free to reach out to us at community@unrealengine.com, and we'll sort of take it from there, let you know what it includes and some good tips and tricks what to think about when you're hosting and how to. As always, finding a venue is hard. We know that. We're trying to find one right now, actually, down here in Raleigh that we can use that isn't necessarily just a bar. Better place for us to bring our laptops and projects and such. And it can be tricky, but feel free to reach out to us. Christian, it's been a pleasure. We're not going to say goodbye just yet. I wanted to mention a few things. For those of you who don't know, all of the Paragon assets that Christian are using in this project are actually available for free on the marketplace. They've been out there for a while, so most of you might know, but I just want to make sure that we mentioned that if you want to go ahead and play with them. Then they come with all of the animations. There's particle effects. I'm not sure how much audio there is for sort of attacks and such, but I do know there's quite a bit of VO in one of the packs.
There's a VO pack. VO pack, and it has a bunch of audio assets too. And definitely, take some time to dig into those folders as well. There's effects and things that come with the characters that aren't necessarily hooked up by default that you can use in a lot of different places. I think the effects that I use for moving and exploding those characters, those are out of, I think, the Monolith, the actual environment pack. I don't know what they were used for in actual Paragon. And then I think my little twirly effect, I think I got out of the FX Variety pack, which is available for free on the marketplace as well in the sponsored section.
Yeah, and if you do start downloading all of them, make sure that you add them to a project that is not your main project, because otherwise that can get bloated real fast. The assets are large. They come with a bunch of materials and textures and animations and everything else. So use a sort of intermediate project where you just move all those files to check it out and experiment with them. If you'd like for us to host you as one of our community spotlights, post on the forums. You can also send us an email. We're inclined and we love watching everything that you guys are working on. As you could have seen if you were here from the start, which was quite a while ago now. We've been going on for a bit. We have a countdown video, which is 30 minutes of development time that you record, and then speed that up to 5 minutes, and go ahead and send us that to, again, community@unrealengine.com together with your logo, and we will probably go ahead and put you on as one of the countdown videos. It's always fun to watch them. And sometimes you learn quite a bit just from seeing someone like doing so much in such a short amount of time. It's pretty useful. Thanks to
That's very
Exodus,
cool.
he's in chat as well. His was the countdown video we were showing off today. If you're streaming on Twitch, make sure that you use the Unreal Engine category. I frequently visit that, and I know Tim and Amanda does as well. We love to come and check out what you guys are working on, and just be part of the community. And always follow us on social media. That's where you'll most commonly see all of our tweets about the news and such that we also do highlight in the live stream. But we're also on social media. We're not only doing this live stream thing, 'cause that would be tough every day, every single time, everything we got something going on. Yeah, I don't think we can do that. Special thanks to all of our all of you primarily, because without you there wouldn't be an Unreal Engine community and we wouldn't be doing these live streams. And then I'd like to let all of you know that next week we will have Øystein. I'm actually pronouncing his name right because I am from Sweden and therefore I know how to say Norwegian names. Hopefully, I'm saying that, but I don't actually know. Øystein from the Future Group will come and talk about the virtual production tool, the way that they've customized Unreal Engine to be able to do live AR. They actually did the Super Bowl event, and he's coming on to talk about that, which I'm really excited about. I've been chatting with him for a bit to come and make that a reality for all of you. And I think with that said, that's it. Thank you once again, Christian, for coming on and showing Parachess to the world this time. I know you've been doing it at a couple of meetups, but it's great to be able to share with a larger audience. And Chad was definitely liking seeing some of the progress for those of them that have already been at the meetups and met you already. And
Awesome.
I knew there
Yeah,
were. Yeah, go ahead, Christian.
Oh no, I was just saying it's really excited to finally have it out to a broader audience. A little more intimidating coming on the live stream than
For sure.
with 50 people to meet up. But yeah, so now you definitely got to finish it. It's like officially announced now, I guess.
Yeah, it's happening. Well, yeah, you did say that you were going to share the project, and so that said, that's live. It will stay on the internet forever now. So y'all can keep tabs on Christian and what happens with the project. Definitely interested in seeing how some of your console development goes and sort of the things you had to change or the stuff you learned to make that happen, because it can definitely be a little bit of a barrier, taking your product that works so well on PC and then making sure that it works on consoles. I'm sure there are a couple of steps there and that will teach you a lot, and then you can share it with everyone who is excited about developing for console, which I think most of us are. All right, that said, we'll see you next week. Christian's saying bye from Seattle. I'm saying bye from North Carolina. Y'all have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.